Mike. Toronto. VK on the beat. Check. I'm in Toronto where you wanna get the city love. I'm from Toronto where you wanna get the city love. I'm in Toronto like we wanna get the city love. My city love me back for my city love.
Welcome to episode 1287 of Toronto Mic'd. Proudly brought to you by Great Lakes Brewery, a fiercely independent craft brewery who believes in supporting communities, good times, and brewing amazing beer. Order online for free local home delivery in the GTA. Palma Pasta. Enjoy the taste of fresh, homemade Italian pasta and entrees from Palma Pasta in Mississauga and Oakville. RecycleMyElectronics.ca. Committing to our planet's future means properly recycling our electronics of the past. Getting hip to the hip. An evening for the Downey Wenjack Fund. The Moment Lab. Brand marketing and strategy, PR, advertising, and production. You need The Moment Lab. And Ridley Funeral Home. Pillars of the community since 1921. Today, making his quarterly Toronto Mic'd appearance, is Edward Keenan.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome back, Ed.
Hey, it's good to be back.
Do you remember your last visit to the Toronto Mic'd studios?
Well, those many weeks ago.
3 months ago.
There was just an election getting underway, I believe. It was a shock. We were in the wake of scandalous revelations out of City Hall. And
right.
And so we were talking about the election that was, months away at that point.
And do you know that we recorded again later that night? Like, do you remember this doubleheader we did? Do you have any memory of this?
Right, that's
okay,
right.
Yeah. I wondered if you remembered.
640 Toronto party.
Right. At GLB Brew Pub.
That's right, downtown. Because, of course, I am a fill-in host there at 640, and you are their official podcaster of their party, at least
right.
at one time.
I crashed that party. I had permission from Chorus. Okay, it wasn't unauthorized, but I mean, I talked to a million people that day, but it was great. You and your wife came on the mic, and I had just had, I said to your wife, I'm sick of your husband, because I had just spent, a couple of hours talking to you earlier in the day, but we did a double header last time.
Yeah, no, exactly. So we've had a few months to dry out, get cool off.
Wiseblood and I were quarterly, and then we decided there's too much. We need to go monthly, and I think you and I need to stay quarterly. I don't.
Yeah.
If you get the itch, though, don't say, "Hey, Mike, let's go monthly," because
then,
I would do monthly, but it would kind of we gotta keep it quarterly.
I gotta keep it special, right?
Yeah.
It's gonna be a special event. It's a few times a year. I get to come back to the basement. I get some pasta.
Oh, you expect pasta? Is that where we're at now?
Well,
you're lucky. I do have a
you have
lasagna for you,
like Pavlov's dog.
Do you get hungry on your drive here?
And all of a sudden, I start the aroma of lasagna. It fills my nose, even though you're not cooking any. That I can tell right now.
No. But you know what? The bad news for you, maybe it's not bad news because you did get one, but I did attend a 50th birthday bash for one Ed Keenan. I don't know if you were there, but I saw on the table the Moneris wireless speaker.
That's right. We were using it there in the backyard.
To see it in the wild, like Boxan. This is, and again, there was a 3-month deal every time a new season drops for Yes We Are Open, but they're great people. I don't mind telling you, Yes We Are Open is a great podcast. But because I was promoting Yes We Are Open for 3 months, every guest got a wireless speaker, and seeing it in the wild in your backyard was like a surreal moment. Like, there it is.
You see, the good thing about these quarterly visits is that I managed to drop in the middle of all these 3-month deals you might have going on. Is that
right?
So I have a little flashlight.
Okay.
I have a tape measure.
You were lucky. I ran out of tape measures.
We have had a lot of Great Lakes beer, but it's all been consumed at this point. So
I brought some to your party. So congrats on turning 50, and that was a great party you had. It was like several hours long. Like, you just drop in when you can, but there were good people there.
Yeah, it was fun.
And I met a guy, like a neighbor of yours, who teaches at my kid's school, and it was like this. Like it's like a teacher's here. Like, it was like a narc.
Yeah, no, exactly. That was a interesting connection that we were previously
and he was buzzed with a
unaware of.
teacher at my kid's school who loves Toronto Mic'd, And then I went to this, I ended up attending like a talent show for my 7-year-old. And all these, like, I hear the hey, Toronto Mike, like the teachers are all calling out Toronto Mike. It was kind of neat.
The thing about that party that was good, we just like, it was kind of a strange crowd in some ways because we said, come by in the afternoon or the evening or late at night, depending on what you want. And I just invited a bunch of people from all different aspects of my life. So you had like, my 75-year-old aunts and uncles and like people from work and the neighborhood people and some media people and just randomly whoever
like
was there.
Podcaster.
Almost like a family wedding or something where you have different parts of your world colliding. But it was, we moved back to Toronto last September and we hadn't seen anybody more or less in 3 years. And not only that, but most of those people hadn't seen each other in a couple of years either because of the pandemic and stuff. So it was just sort of like, it's spring. It's a nice round birthday I'm having. It's an excuse to get people together and just see everybody after all
So
this
I'm only
time.
1 year behind you. Like literally next June, I would have the same birthday. Now maybe I'll do the same thing.
Yeah,
maybe
you
just
should
have a
used to have
drop-in.
big drop-in party too. I recommend it.
It's like The Godfather, his daughter's wedding. Like people just come by.
And you'll probably have a whole bunch of box hand speakers so you could just line them up and
you don't have to turn on your red light.
blast the whole neighborhood.
So since you were last here, like you said, we just kind of were getting ready to dive into that mayoral election. A lot of people, I don't think even Olivia Chow had declared that she was running yet when you were here.
Yeah, I haven't re-listened to it or checked out
Why
the
not?
dates,
You didn't listen to it on the way
I think
here?
she was thinking about running at that point, or she was rumored to be thinking about running at that point, but she had not officially gotten in as far as I can remember.
And I feel like you and I were of the same mindset at that time that like, oh, she's going to come in and we already, like, there's already the Josh Matlow was already like said he'd run. And it felt like a little bit like, oh, she's just going to like hurt Matlow and then somebody like a Saunders is going to come up the middle. Like there was a bit of that feeling at the time.
I mean, I think there was a lot of people, not just me and you, but a lot of very
but no one else
smart
matters, Ed.
political people that I know, a lot of NDP-affiliated political people that I know who thought her time had come and gone. That in 2014, she had a great shot. She was the front runner at the beginning.
Right.
She kind of blew it. She basically retired from politics after, she ran again for her federal seat and lost that to Adam Vaughan, I believe. And then, sort of had retired as like a wise old auntie of the left in Toronto, teaching out of TMU and all of that, and sort of being a mentor to younger activists. And a lot of people thought, well, that's a good role for her now. But I mean, she certainly demonstrated the folly of that kind of thinking, and she has launched herself into, as far as I can tell, the preparations to become mayor, which will happen, next week. Officially, I believe, or the week after that. Here's the thing.
Yeah.
I'm going on 2 weeks vacation as of tomorrow afternoon, and I'm desperately trying to keep my brain in Toronto until that happens. But I haven't, because I'm going to be out of town, I haven't updated my calendar with the most significant events that are coming in early July. So,
But spoiler alert, Olivia Chow won.
She did. She sure did. And fairly convincingly, I think.
Yeah, like
under the circumstances.
Yeah. Like considering the way the results were coming in, and it was weird. I was watching on television, and they weren't like telling you, like, how when you watch the election, and I don't know, you're watching the American election results come in, and they're like, oh, these are coming from like downtown Milwaukee, but we
right. Like, yeah. Like Trump's ahead in Michigan, but the vote that's still out is the Detroit vote.
Detroit.
We haven't heard
it's very
from
Democrat.
Detroit, and we know that that's going to be the thing. And you learn all the counties of the United States. At least in Pennsylvania, Michigan,
or Florida,
Wisconsin,
for sure. Yeah,
Florida,
all the swing states.
But we didn't know where the vote was coming in. So I think two things made election night feel like a way more of a nail biter than it was expected to be, but also than it actually turned out to be. Although it was closer, right? It was not a.
It was closer than we thought it was.
She didn't win running away.
No,
and that's the thing, is that she won with Anna Bilau running up towards her. But we had been told all the polling until about a week and a half before the election showed that like she was just going to cruise to victory. And so the fact that it was not a complete blowout was point one. But the other thing is what you were pointing out is that the way the vote was reported, right? The polls are already closed. These votes are already cast.
And we just scanned them, right? So they're
yeah,
not counted
but
by
the
humans.
count is coming in
Right.
at a rate where it's like, whoa, somehow Anna Bilau has pulled way out into the lead. Oh, now Olivia Chow is inching back towards her. And you
Right.
have this
drama,
this feeling of a drama. But within an hour, that was all resolved. And Olivia Chow won by, almost 5 points, 4.5 in between there. But of a very divided field, 102 candidates, 7 or 8 high-profile candidates that got a lot of coverage and who did split the vote more than in past elections. I did a whole bunch of math on it and trying to look at it different ways. And this is only what was it? This is the second election since amalgamation in which the 3 top candidates did not get more than 90% of the vote. And the only other one was the last one where the 3 top candidates got like 88% or something like that. Whereas in this one, the 3 top candidates got less than 80% of the vote.
Wow.
Right? It's so there was a big split of like a fifth of the electorate that went to none of the front runners. And then the other interesting thing I think about the way that Olivia Chow won is that she didn't just win downtown. She did win downtown fairly convincingly. The old city of Toronto, not what you and I would have grown up calling downtown, but what Rob Ford called downtown, like
right.
the whole entire old city of Toronto.
Right.
She won that and fairly convincingly, but she also won Scarborough. Almost all of Scarborough. The one ward in Scarborough that she didn't win outright was essentially a tie. It was within, I believe, 200 votes. She also won Willowdale. There was another North York ward where it was like within 50 votes. And then Humber River Black Creek, which is in Etobicoke, she lost by 2 votes.
Wow.
At least in the unofficial count. And so it was a bit more widespread, right? She did the familiar map we're used to looking at where it's like Ford Nation is the entire outer ringer suburbs. Like Olivia Chow convincingly won Scarborough. That's something. And it means something different about kind of, I think, how she might approach the job or how some people like me might approach it as critics who are talking about the ways in which the city is divided or the ways in which we disagree with each other on things. Because for a long time, it's been this sense of like the people of Scarborough are feeling left out and alienated and reactionary as a result, and they don't want the progressives and all of that. Well, they just elected one. They helped elect one, right? So
a few firsts here. You mentioned amalgamation. So these are firsts since the megacity.
Mm-hmm.
First woman to be mayor of the megacity.
That's right. And the third in Toronto history entirely. Although, see, this is where you get into the longer Toronto history, it's like a smaller and smaller thing, right? Because June Rowlands and Barbara Hall were both mayors of the old city of Toronto.
Right.
But of course, Frances Nunziata was the mayor of York. There was at least one woman who was mayor of Scarborough, and I'm trying to remember Pauline. I can't remember it right now, but there was at least, so there were other women who were mayors in what is now Toronto, but she is the first since amalgamation and the third official mayor of the city of Toronto in its entire history.
Okay, so just to recap for the newbies here. Okay, so we have Mel Lastman, we have David Miller, of course. We have Rob Ford, and then we had John Tory, and now we have Olivia Chow. So not only first woman, but also the first racialized person to be elected mayor of Toronto.
That's right. There was one William Peyton Hubbard is famously referred to often, during Black History Month or whatever, the fact will come up, we had this black mayor. And he was actually the black acting mayor. He was a black politician in the very early 1900s, repeatedly elected as an alderman, and then citywide, he won to the Board of Control. And so in his capacity on the Board of Control, he often served as the acting mayor when the mayor was out of town, like on city business and whatnot. And so, he was the first racialized person to do some of the role of to perform the role of mayor sometimes.
Sure,
but it's more equivalent to like Jennifer McKelvey being the deputy mayor and leading council than it is. This is the first person of color to ever be elected to that job in the entire history of Toronto.
And also, since I'm a big fan of these like barroom trivia firsts or whatnot, this is the first person for whom English is their second language.
Ah, that's interesting.
Because Anna Bailau
Mm-hmm.
would also be, if she had won, she would also be the first. She would have been the first person for whom English was her second language.
And we did have. She's not even the first immigrant to be elected mayor since amalgamation. David Miller was born in the United States and raised in England.
Right.
But basically, and in early Toronto history, a lot of our mayors were born in Scotland or England or Ireland. As late as the 1960s, we had a mayor who was an immigrant to Toronto from England. But she is the first immigrant from a country outside of the North America and the British Isles, or what used to be called the British Isles, including Ireland, right? So
and English is her second language.
And Anna Bailau would have been that too.
Right.
Also would have had English as her second language.
Also would have been the first woman elected as mayor of the mega city.
That's right. And even Mark Saunders, who English is his first language, but he was also he moved here from Jamaica. So the top three finishers, the entire podium, were immigrants to Toronto from non-traditional countries, right?
Okay, well done. Okay, so there's a few hot spots. We're going to do a tight 90 today. I know we're itching to do like a 5-hour deep dive and everything, but we're going to do a tight 90. You've already got your pasta. You're getting Great Lakes beer. You're getting another flashlight from Ridley Funeral Home. So don't worry, Ed, you won't leave empty-handed. I know that's why you're here. Okay, so
that's not here for the graft.
Let's talk about the Tory endorsement for a moment here. Okay, so I will preface this to say I jokingly tweeted, so my tongue was in my cheek, but the Toronto Star keeps talking about this endorsement by John Tory being a big push for Anna Bailau that helped her on election day, because on election day itself, Anna Bailau actually gets more votes than Olivia Chow, like on election day.
Yeah.
So this big push, I just want you to know, Ed Keenan, that Anna Bailau on the Friday before election day,
you think it's the Toronto
came
Mike
on Toronto
bump.
Mic'd, and there's no credit, no discussion of the Toronto Mic'd bump Anna Bailau would have received for her Toronto Mike debut on the Friday before election day.
I think it's just a conspiracy against you. Is the
bullshit?
Honest truth.
David Ryder, are you listening? Come on, let's repair this. Okay.
The other thing is that what was also only passingly being mentioned in the Star's coverage is that the Star's editorial endorsement also came that same week, actually on the same day as John Tory's endorsement. And I think when you talk to political people on Bailau's team, but also the other teams, they credit it to John Tory's endorsement. And I think they're all overlooking the Toronto Mike bump at their own peril, because there will be other elections upcoming, and these people will be working on those campaigns.
Look, I got Amber Morley elected, okay?
And they will need to try and curry favor with here in the basement.
You are wise. Okay, so but let's pretend like John Tory had something to do with all this. I found it interesting to read the behind-the-scenes story. Maybe I'll let you talk, but about Brad Bradford, also an FOTM, by the way, but Brad Bradford and Anna Bailau sort of both kind of getting, like, I don't know, mentored by John Tory.
Yeah.
And then how Bradford
and
reacts.
even during the campaign.
Yeah, you tell the story, like how Bradford reacts to the fact that suddenly, at the very last minute almost, John Tory does this big public endorsement of Anna Bailau.
Yeah, and I mean, Brad Bradford... some people may be questioning his entire smarts after that campaign or whatever, but I think, like, the guy's not a complete idiot, and he knew there was a chance that John Tory would endorse Anna Bailau because it was in the air, this speculation, Willie or won't he? But according to the reporting of my colleagues, he wasn't given a heads up. You know, he had been consulting with Tory, getting advice from him through the campaign, as had Anna Bailau.
Right.
And John Tory had, said some nice things about Mitzi Hunter for some of those profiles too. He'd been saying he was going to stay out of it. And he was kind of doing an elder statesman mentor role.
Okay.
But then, Bradford found out about the endorsement from the press, from the media, not from John Tory himself. And so apparently they had a very hostile. Well, then he tweeted out about it, right? He's got his nose out of joint, so he tweets out something along the lines of, tomorrow's solutions are not going to come from yesterday's politicians, or something like that.
Right.
And so then John Tory who, in my own experience, is very sensitive to criticism, more so than you would think. When you keep running for jobs where everyone in the city is going to call you a bum all the time, but John Tory is very sensitive to this kind of criticism, especially from people he perceives as, having a respectful relationship with.
Right,
so
or allies.
Apparently they start, a back and forth, texts or...
So what's our source? I did read it quickly, but what is the source on this? Like, where's the leak here?
Well, my colleagues in the Toronto Star Bureau talked to a lot of people involved in a lot of the campaigns, and so I do not know exactly who their source is, and of course you'd have to pull my fingernails out to try and... Well,
I always protect my sources.
It's easier for me if I don't know, but people close to Bradford's campaign... People who worked on Bradford's campaign were the sources of this information, as well, I presume, and I don't know about this particular fact or exchange, but they were also have several sources who've been close to Tory for years and have been in communication with him. They have sources inside Anna Bailau's campaign as well. So, that entire piece about how it all came together and the aftermath of it drew on all those sources. But I think it's fair to say that if they're reporting it, it's fairly reliable, right?
For sure. For sure. I ask the tough questions around here, Ed.
Yeah.
This is the hot seat, Toronto Mike here. Okay, so you believe, in your opinion, the John Tory endorsement of Anna Bailau was a huge positive for Anna. Is that your opinion?
I mean, I think so. I think if
because I wasn't sure when it
had
happened.
been given a little longer to play out too, there's like dominoes that fall and they're not all predictable, right? I think we saw a lot of Josh Matlow and Mitzi Hunter's vote collapse. If the John Tory endorsement had come earlier, it might have more so. Like rather than getting 4 or 5%, they might have gotten 1% like Bradford did, and a lot of that vote would have gone to, no doubt, to Olivia Chow. It's hard to predict exactly what would have happened with the Anthony Furey, Mark Saunders, sort of right-wing. I think there are limits to how many of those populist voters or right-wing voters would take Bailau as an anybody but Chow candidate. Like, there's a constituency of people who will vote for the People's Party or for, who voted for Faith Goldie at one point.
So this is a group of people that would deem Anna Bailau to be too much of a leftist.
Too far left wing, right?
Right.
And I mean, Mark Saunders also did. Anna Bailau is viewed by many progressives in Toronto and certainly by the NDP in Toronto and people like former Mayor David Miller as a right-wing figure or a conservative figure in the John Tory mold, largely because she was John Tory's sort of housing lieutenant and was a reliable member of his team, but she has always kind of branded herself as a progressive, but it's not just branding, right? It may vary issue to issue, but her connection to the labor movement and to labor issues and her dedication to that is not really questioned.
Right.
And that's not a right-wing thing.
Right.
And she's been always opposed to contracting out. She's opposed to opening up the bargaining agreements. And, affordable housing has always been her big issue. And so, I think she's really in the center, but she would say she positions herself as a center-left leaning candidate. So, if John Tory was the center-right, she'd want to be on the center-left. We're part of this same middle coalition.
Well,
But yeah, certainly for a lot of right-wing voters in Toronto, she's way too left-wing. And for a lot of left-wing voters in Toronto, she's way too right-wing. But there are a lot of mushy voters in Toronto, and she did get most of them, I think.
Right. Well, I just remembered that when you were here 3 months ago, one of the things we did was of all the candidates we knew of, we dropped them into buckets. Like we had we basically put on the plate. We did that exercise. At the time, we put Anna and we put Brad Bradford actually into the centrist bucket is where we stuck them. Then a couple months later, Matt Elliott came over and we kind of did the exercise again, and Brad Bradford had moved to the right. And I'm just going back to Brad before we put a tie on the whole Anna Bailau thing. And lest we forget, Olivia Chow did actually win this election, but I want to ask you about Mark Saunders too. But what do you think went wrong with Brad Bradford's campaign? he ended up with, I have the numbers here, so I'm just going to pull it up here. And I enjoyed my hour with him very much, actually. But he ended up with 9,254 votes, and I got to go find a source that gives me the percentage. But it was like a 1% or something.
Yeah, it's distressingly low.
It was just a little bit higher than Chris Sky. Okay,
I think not much went right with Brad Bradford's campaign, and I've talked about this on my podcast at the Star, and I've talked to a lot of people about this. But I think essentially there's a fundamental mismatch between Brad Bradford's entire political identity before the campaign started,
right,
and his own advertising. He came in, okay, so I just wanted, this is a digression, but for anybody who's listening who doesn't know, the Star editorial board is a group of writers and columnists, editors who decide the official editorial position of the Toronto Star. They write the unsigned editorials that appear on the editorial page, and they decide the official editorial board endorsements, which have nothing to do with the newsroom. They don't report to the same editors as me. They report
these are
directly
mutually
to
exclusive silos.
They report directly to the publisher.
Okay.
And they consult with the publisher, right? He owns the newspaper. The editorial page reflects his idea of right and wrong as much as anything, right? But it's separate from not just the reporters, but opinion columnists like me. I have nothing to do with it, except that when they invite candidates in to speak to the editorial board, they will usually invite the newsroom's subject area experts, the beat reporters, the columnists who write about that issue,
right.
Including even our Queen's Park reporters, because they want people who are informed to ask good questions, be participating in the debate. So we appear at those editorial board interviews as sort of guests who participate in the discussion. And we also get to observe it, take notes. We can use it for our own. But after Brad Bradford came into so when the editorial board decided to endorse Anna Bilau, I was not consulted. I found out hours before readers did.
Well, I thought you found out when you read your newspaper.
That's usually when I find out. In this case, there was an email sent out just giving us a heads up. This is what's coming today. Because we deal with the complaints, right? Right? I have nothing to do with it, or even more so, David Ryder, the Toronto Star City Hall bureau chief, has nothing to do with it. But for the next 3 years, he's going to be hearing about how he's got it in for Olivia Chow because the Star supported Bilau, and we're all in the bag for Anna Bilau, and our candidate, whose team we all joined, lost, and all of that. So the heads up was just like, so you can kind of prepare for the flack that you're
Brace
about
yourself.
to get. Your Twitter is about to explode with people, so angry at you,
Right.
About something that you have no control of that affects your life otherwise not at all, or your job not at all. But so anyhow, I was a guest at the editorial board meeting with Brad Bradford, and one of the other people who was in attendance at that meeting, who's a writer and a smart guy, but not a follower every day of Toronto City Hall politics, right? Kind of came out of the meeting and was like, he spent an hour there talking to us. He arrived on his bike share. He sat down and he's talking to the Toronto Star, right? So he's maybe emphasizing the things that he thinks will be favorable to the Toronto Star, and not emphasizing this sort of like law and order authoritarian Brad. So all of a sudden he was city planner Brad, and he's talking about how you build cities for the future, for the world we're becoming, and like climate change, and then talking in real depth about his experiences inside City Hall and the bureaucracy and what needs to be changed on a very specific, like granular level. So anyhow, we come out of that meeting, and this one smart guy says to me, "Who the hell was that?" And I said, "It's Brad Bradford." And he was like, he is unrecognizable from his own campaign advertising. Like the Brad Bradford in his campaign videos is not the same guy I just spent an hour with.
I heard the same thing.
Are, not only are they not the same guy, they are like enemies with each other.
Yeah, that Brad Bradford would hate the Brad Bradford that was running for mayor.
And I think my understanding, and I don't get this from any deep conversations with Brad or deep sources in campaign, but from what I can tell, there are a couple of right-wing or like Canadian conservative thought leaders, Corey Tenyaki whose last name I always botch up, but who used to run Fox News and who's like a mastermind on the Ford campaign and all of that. And then the fella who runs Ontario Proud.
Right.
It was like the conservative sort of like meme lord, like online.
Right.
These guys are friends of his from like cycling in the beaches.
Yeah.
Like they're just friends.
East York
And they
buds.
say, what if we run your campaign? And so together they kind of design a campaign that those guys want to run because they think there's an open lane in Toronto city politics. And maybe Brad Bradford has this kind of, you can see how in the drawing room they're thinking like, so you've got this affiliation with John Tory, which gives you sort of center right leaning credibility, but you're a bike riding urban planner,
Right.
which gives you this center left credibility. And so maybe if we can marry that with some of the like, I will be the strong mayor to crush dissent and keep you safe from all the predators who are trying to get you, the law and order authoritarian. If we can add that, and yet there's a process of subtraction that happens when you do that addition, because when you suddenly become like strongman Brad, all the bike riding city planner Brad fans go, no, he's not my guy
Not
at all.
our guy.
But I also think that like the type of people who were tempted to vote for Anthony Furey are never going to be convinced that the bike riding city planner is their actual guy, right? Like you were the guy who put the heartfelt message about how we have to rethink policing in the wake of George Floyd's death and rethink how we fund the police and reallocate some of that fund. That is the actual message of Black Lives Matter, defund the police. He put out that message, and now all of a sudden he's going to be the thin blue line guy? Like just 2 years later, 3 years later?
Right.
Come on.
It's amazing the story you tell there, because who is that guy? Like, he's unrecognizable, because one of the prevailing notes, common, threads of people would write after the Brad Bradford episode of Toronto Mike. So he came over by himself, by the way, just sat where you're sitting now. We talked for over an hour, one-on-one. No one else in the room. Even Anna had somebody in the room, but Brad and I one-on-one for over an hour. And I kept hearing from people like, oh, I like that guy. Like, I could get behind that guy, but that guy doesn't resemble the guy who's running for mayor. Like this disconnect between the Brad Bradford that you see in the media and that, in the debates and stuff running for mayor, and the guy who I chatted with for an hour. Like, they're different people.
And there's always, I think, not always, but regrettably often, there are messages that politicians adopt for a campaign because they think they'll need it to get elected. And often they keep some of those after they get elected because you dance with them what brung you, right?
Right.
So, John Tory as the head of Civic Action, as a private citizen, as a talk radio host, was against the construction of the Scarborough subway extension and in favor of the LRT plan, was open to road tolls and reconfiguring the Gardiner. As a candidate for mayor and as an experienced talk radio host, he thought, nope, we have to say, we've made our decision. We're sticking with our decision. This is what we're doing. We're not fighting the war on the car anymore. And then as mayor, he stuck to most of those, right? Because he thought, that's my message.
Right.
They're not usually the complete 180s of entire character that many of us perceived in Brad Bradford's persona. But also, there's this big question then of like, well, which guy's going to be mayor? Like, which part of Brad Bradford gets to be mayor? And I do think actually that Brad Bradford's actual constituency, like the way he wanted to be, the way he was promoted to be the chair of the Planning and Housing Committee under John Tory in his most recent term,
Right.
and the sort of taking over Anna Bailau's old job as the guy whose job is to try and get housing built as quickly as possible, is that there's a faction of Torontonians who would call themselves progressives or who are in favor of traditionally progressive things like bike lane or civic progressive. Like, there's no reason why these are left-wing issues, but in Toronto politics,
it's been politicized,
like bike lanes, like housing density, and those things, who are fed up with how, especially in the housing crisis, are fed up with how long things are taking and the number of bureaucratic obstacles and the amount of red tape. And so I think the strong mayor of action, it's time to cut the BS and cut through it and just get it done. And if that means I just have to go in there and give orders, we're going to get this housing built. Like, I do think that there's a constituency for that, but I'm not sure how well it marries with the kind of like law and orderness and all of that. There's just like, I mean, the short answer is that I think there's a lack of authenticity that you perceive in Brad Bradford's political persona on the campaign trail. And I mean, he's a young guy, potentially still a long career ahead of him. But I think
do you think he's in trouble
got
in
a
3
lot
years?
to. Oh, he might be.
Yeah,
I'm
I
not
think
in on the ground in
he's got
Beaches
3
East
years
York,
to-
but the
yeah.
people I hear from there are. Well, I mean, it's embarrassing. But now he had always said that he was going to term limit himself to 2 terms anyway. That he thought 2 terms was going to be enough as a city councilor. And so I think at the end of that 2 terms, he was thinking maybe mayor, maybe something else. So there's a chance he might not run again. And potentially a good chance, especially after that. If he thinks he's vulnerable, why would you put yourself through that again, right? Why
Right.
would you put your young family through that again?
Right.
His wife he had a new child born in the middle of this campaign.
He was very appreciative. I was giving him a lasagna on the way out because there's a meal right there, and you know what it's like with the newbies. It's like, oh yeah,
Absolutely.
you know, it's tough. It's
So
tough.
anyway, we've spent a lot of time discussing a guy who got like 1% of the vote.
Yeah, well, he's an FOTM. Okay, so he got 1.28. So let's do this.
But
Yeah?
okay.
You wanna
But
finish the
I was
Brad
gonna jump
Bradford?
to
Yeah.
no, because this is where I think
Because I now have
like
numbers.
what we've been talking about with Brad Bradford, like a lot of the discussion of his authenticity or whatever, we centered around like, you know, how far on the left-right spectrum he moved and all of that. But I think like part of the result of this election, as I interpret it, and going out and talking, was like a reminder that those of us who view this as like something we follow regularly have this idea of the political spectrum and teams and stuff, but especially at the civic level. Like, I think a lot of voters are just, it's based on personal vibes. Like, that's, you say, somebody will say, not you necessarily, but like, how can we have an election where everybody agrees the city's going down the toilet, like it's busted up and broken down and not maintained, and nobody can afford to live here anymore, and like, and then, but also agree, well, if John Tory won again, we'd vote overwhelmingly for him.
Right.
Like, obviously.
Right.
And it's like, they just kind of like John Tory. Like, and they don't say it's a right-wing penny pinching thing or whatever.
Right.
Like, and I think in this campaign, a lot of people just liked Olivia Chow the best. And like, to those who tuned into debates and stuff, they're seeing that she looks comfortable in her own skin. She's smiling. She's talking hopefully about the city. And she's well known and is polarizing because of the NDP stuff. Like, political people have strong opinions about whether they would ever vote for her and all of that. But for the general public, it's like she's not widely despised. Like, she doesn't have the kind of baggage. And Jack Layton, when he died, Jack and Olivia as a team were really well known across the country and especially in this city, and not subject to the kind of like intense polarization that somebody like Robert Doug Ford is subject to, right? Like she's not carrying the same kind of baggage, right? This is not a like Joe Biden, Donald Trump situation, right? Where the best known person is also the most widely hated or whatever. It's more like, yeah, she always seemed like a nice woman. And she's got her heart in the right place. She's done a lot of good things. Like, and I think people just like that. So I think to some extent, they didn't know Anna Bilow particularly well. And I think you sat down and talked to her, but I don't think her campaign necessarily did a really good job of, they started to towards the end, but I don't think like early on she really was established as a persona, as a person in people's minds where people really knew what she was all about. She was parading out a whole list of endorsements, like city councilors who like her and all of that. And so it's like all these people vouch for me, but a lot of voters, I think, well, but what if I invited you over for dinner? Like, what kind of person are you? We're going to live with this mayor for a long time, right?
Right.
I mean, I think so much of this came down to, like, in my own sense, is just like, it's not a left-wing, right-wing thing necessarily. And it's vaguely about policy, but it, to the extent that everybody agreed on housing, it's more about like, is there a person I like who can make me feel some sense of hope that they're going to try and solve some of these problems? And I think Olivia Chow won that contest.
So she won that contest with 37.17% of the vote. But of course, as you know, because you're good at math, that means 63% of people wanted someone else to be mayor.
Mm-hmm.
So this Tory endorsement seems to be this point where I guess the people who, anyone but Chow, they call it, the ABC vote, I guess that's the term that they've been using. They found like, oh, there's our person, where prior to that, is it Mark Saunders? I know Mark Saunders tried to present himself as the...
He certainly went hard on that. Yeah. He had signs printed up and everything like that. Like right. Chow is how you beat, or Saunders is how you beat Chow. Vote Saunders to stop Chow.
But he must have just bled out, like...
rebranded his own website.
Oh, and he had the robocalls coming from ever so popular Doug Ford in this city. So Doug Ford's robocalls.
I mean, if you line up, if you wanted to parse out this endorsement game as a contest, like Doug Ford and John Tory more or less rolled out their endorsements at the same time. Doug Ford backed into his, he was kind of hinting. Is Kim Wright, the strategist at Wright Strategies, who I did the global panel on election night? She was saying early in the campaign, Doug Ford was saying, well, I'm staying out of it, but I do like that Mark Saunders. I'm not saying anybody's name. I'm going to stay out of it, but you sure would want a former police chief, like a guy who's run a big citywide organization, who's
wink,
well known, and maybe so, but. It was like the day before Tory announced his endorsement that he, the whole thing about he's got a sign on his lawn, and then he said, yeah, he's who I'm voting for, and then he jumped in with both feet, more on the attack against Chow in the days that followed, and he did a robocall, I think.
I got one.
But so it's head-to-head endorsements. At that point in the polls, these guys appear to be essentially tied, Bilau and Saunders. Mm-hmm. Depending on which poll you're reading, Main Street has, but for all intents and purposes, the two Stop Chow candidates appear, from what we can gather, to be roughly equal. And John Tory endorses one, and Doug Ford endorses the other. These guys are longtime enemies turned frenemies turned whatever. Both of them re-entering the race to face down their old foe, Olivia Chow, who they managed to combine to defeat in 2014.
Right.
But in that, so if it's a head-to-head, who has more juice with the Toronto electorate? I think Doug Ford comes out of this humiliated, absolutely just demolished, right?
All right, so let me drop the numbers here, and then, because to me, the big surprise was what a non-factor Mark Saunders ended up being, because my big fear all along was that, I don't know, there'll be a split, and then Mark Saunders comes up the middle somehow and becomes, first past the post, which I'm going to ask you about that in a minute, actually. But okay, so Mark Saunders ended up getting 8.58% of the vote. Okay, 62,000 votes. I mean, Anthony Furey had 35,000, but just to give some perspective, Olivia Chow wins with 37.17% of the vote, and Anna Bilau is a respectable second place with 32.45% of the vote. So third place, less than 9% of the vote. That's got to be a sad night in the Saunders household. That's pretty bad. Am I right?
Yeah, and a sad, a humiliation for the members of Doug Ford's team,
right?
Who thought this guy was going to be the horse that could run for them, right? That's what they thought from the beginning. Doug Ford's team, with a couple high-profile conservative exceptions who were running Brad Bradford, and Nick Kouvalis, who aligned up because of his Tory connection, essentially, with Anna Bilau.
Right.
And those two had history at City Hall, right? They knew each other in the Ford years at City Hall. But basically a bunch of Doug Ford's people ran Mark Saunders for mayor. Now, a couple things happened here, right? One is that Saunders is just a phenomenally uninspiring candidate. And if there's a way to mean that in the nicest possible way, I kind of do.
Well, you were shocked he was running at all because there's no sign.
He never seemed comfortable in the public eye. He, as police chief, he very clearly hated press conferences, hated being questioned, seemed to grudgingly make speeches where the words were obviously, written by some professional forum, and or he speaks in cop speak, right, which is a language of uncommunication, right, like
Right.
the official,
like saying words but saying
it's
nothing.
a form of bureaucraties that says next to nothing,
Right.
or where there's no sentence has a subject, right? It's all objects. Like every verb is a passive, and
8.58%.
No one's a
Ed.
person. There's never a guy. It's an individual, right? And so anyway, that's how he talks, and
Right.
and he almost seems meek. Like there are other, and I don't want to get into psychoanalyzing that, because I actually, my brother's 6'3" and is a big guy, and he was big from the time he was in grade 6. And at a certain point early on, he started slouching, and he's very soft spoken, and it's a conscious decision on his part to not appear intimidating. He realized that some people found him scary and adopted an entire a series of personal tics to make himself less intimidating to people, less imposing, right? And some of that you might look at and say, this guy needs a shot of confidence. This guy needs to stand up straight, and he needs to project his voice. And so trying to, like, it is not my place, given that I'm a short loudmouth and a white guy who has, every privilege in this city, right?
Sure.
To psychoanalyze how a black man who's an immigrant to Canada from Jamaica, who decides to pursue a career in the police force with all the obstacles he faces, but also the baggage that people have with, a black man in a position of authority. Maybe his persona is evolved. Maybe it's just the way he was born, but maybe it's evolved a different way. But I would just point out that, like, other police chiefs who you think of going into politics, people like Julian Fantino and Bill Blair, you see them command a room, right? Like, you may dislike them a lot, you may like them a lot, but when they come in, it's like a few good men, like, you can't handle the truth. Like, you want me on that wall. Like, they are barking orders at people. And Mark Saunders, even as police chief, seemed much more, and, this is refreshing in some ways, but much more soft-spoken, much more having a back and forth, like much more of a manager. And yet, as a political candidate, again, it's not like you're getting this sense of his great vision. And actually, again, going back to the editorial board, when Mark Saunders came into the room,
Yeah.
he got really excited and really engaging when he was talking about programs to deal with, especially in the black community, offenders or people who had been drawn into gang life. He was talking about how, like, it's important that we have diversion programs for at-risk youth. But he was like, what about already involved youth now? Like, once somebody has fired a gun, once somebody is in that life, how do you convince them to take a better path out of it? And he was talking about his ideas for legitimate strategies to do that, and the work that would be involved in doing that, and the passion that he was showing for that made me think, I wish this guy was in charge of a program to do that. Right. His whole life experience, both as a police officer, as a member of that community, as a retired police officer who's been trying to do work on the other side, on the non-policing end of it, is like, this is what drives him. And the difference between how he talks about that and how he talks about trying to manage the city's budget situation or his plan for housing, which is this mixture of political talking points, like about how Olivia Chow's big bureaucracy is not going to get it done, but also like management seminar speak about the leadership threads that you have to follow to really, penetrate down. And it's like I'm never left with an understanding of what he's talking about, but I'm also not left with a clear sense that he understands clearly what he's talking about on those kinds of issues. But when he gets to what he's passionate about, you think, man, I want this guy to be in charge of that stuff. And yet somehow he thought, or was convinced, that it would be a good idea for him to run for mayor, which is a job where basically everybody in the city, like, views you as a target, right? And you have to stand up and use the words you speak to persuade them that you're on their side, to try and rally them to your side and all of that. It's not I think to rise to the position of police chief in Toronto, he has to have a lot of skills, like management skills, both as a police officer, but also as a mover in the bureaucracy. But those skills are not the typical ones of a stump politician. And I think that showed on the campaign trail. And so I think part of Mark Saunders performing really poorly is that I just don't actually think he's really cut out to be a candidate.
I'm glad to see such a, single digits, right? 8.58%. I was afraid he might win this thing because he was leaning hard on things like ripping up bike lanes. I think that was a quote, right? So it's sort of like you kind of have your own, I have my own personal vision for the city, and hearing something like that, which is like a jarring opposite of my vision, rip up bike lanes, it's you actually become fearful, like, oh, what if this guy becomes mayor of Toronto?
Well, two things. I think, like, one thing is that his poor showing is also partly the hurting effect, though, of, like, the anybody but Chow situation.
Of
right?
course.
And, like, when you look back and say Barbara Hall got 5% of the vote or something silly, small like that in 2003 when David Miller won, Barbara Hall was the commanding leader at the start of that campaign. Like, close to half of people voted for her against Mel Lastman, like 48% or 49%, or maybe it was 47, whatever it was. But also then, like, close to half of people were supporting her at the start of that campaign. And she just collapsed in the end. But that's the phenomenon where once David Miller became the progressive torchbearer,
right, everybody
heard it to him.
100%.
And it was no reflection on Barbara Hall necessarily. Right. I mean, maybe of a poorly run campaign or whatever, but it wasn't her personal unpopularity that drove her down that way. She was generally a well-liked figure. And I think Mark Saunders did suffer a bit of that. He and his campaign managed to really sort of define the choice of anybody but Chow, but then he lost the primary to decide who anybody but Chow was. It was anybody was not him. Right? It was Anna Bailão. And 100%. So I think he suffers in the end for that. But I also think there's like a misplaced emphasis on things like that. Because when he held his press conference with Stephen Holiday to say, this bike lane, extension of the Bloor bike lane out to Etobicoke, right? From Runnymede, where it stops now, Phase 3 will run out past Royal York to just past Islington, I believe. We're going to reverse that decision. And Stephen Holiday, city councilor, was there saying, yeah. He was repeating his earlier endorsement, just putting an exclamation point on it, right?
Right.
I went and looked, and that city council decision, it's a larger plan that includes that western extension of the Bloor bike line. That bike plan was passed at city council 21-1. Stephen Holiday's the only one who voted against it.
So no mayor can reverse that decision.
So, but to me, that's a signifier that there is still I am a talk radio host sometimes. Yeah. I am a participant in this city. So I know there are a lot of people who are loudly angry still about bike lanes, for whom this really is a wedge issue. But you see from the votes at Toronto City Council that it's actually no longer a live issue. It's like there's a consensus. The councillors in Scarborough, the councillors in North York, the councillors who voted to remove the Jarvis bike lanes and actually did rip those out, right? These people are now, or their successors, are all voting overwhelmingly for these bike plans. John Tory came around and became, he not as much as the bike people want him to be. But I have to say, from the time I left for Washington, D.C., and then the time I came back, it was like I could just notice. I was like, there's a bike lanes on Bloor. There's bike lanes on University. This is great. I can ride to work now and feel safe. I never did before from roughly the same neighborhood. Right. So you could see the progress. And I think, so it's not to say that the people in the city who think the bike lanes are a huge mistake, there is a chunk of them, and they're loud about it. And a lot of them are on the road all day. But they're not a political force at City Hall, right. And it appears not a political force in this election. Anthony Furey and Mark Saunders, the two anti-bike lane candidates, combined got 15% of the vote, right?
Right.
There you
Yeah,
go.
8 point,
That's it.
Less actually, yeah. But one thing, when you get the call at 6:40 from the person who is complaining about the bike lanes, if you ask them the next question, which is where do you live, more often than not, it's somebody who's maybe they have to get to downtown Toronto for work or a sporting event or whatever, but they live in the 905. I'm telling you, most of these angry,
a lot of them do, and I think
live in the 905.
A lot of the people who misoverestimated Mark Saunders' potential support,
right?
I think are thinking that 905 sentiments apply to the Toronto electorate, right? That a lot of the things he was running on, there was a moment, and it was more than a moment. There has been this year some strong concerns about public safety. There were a few really high-profile incidents that caused a lot of us to start questioning, am I safe? Are my kids safe on the subway? Am I safe downtown? Like, what's the hell is happening here, right? But the most fearful voices I've heard are people who live outside the city, who are like, are you thinking about getting out? Are you going to escape to Vaughan like we did? Are you coming out to Mississauga like we did, right? They're retroactively justifying their own decisions to move out there. Nobody can afford to live in the city anymore. And I will not go down there anymore because it's not safe. I just read my newspaper. It's not safe. But I'm down there every day. I know it's not as safe as I would like it to be, but not a war zone. Not any place I'm afraid to take my children. Right. There's these people will say on Twitter or whatever, they'd be like, come down to Yonge and Dundas Square and tell me that you would allow your child to be at Yonge and Dundas Square. It's like, my daughter goes to school downtown and eats lunch at the Eaton Center.
100%. Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
Come on.
I think my daughter's down there right now.
And you see this a lot in the United States, where I would go to rural Pennsylvania and people would be like, you live in Washington, D.C., it's like that city's burning to the ground, just like Portland and San Francisco. Like, they use these words, the names of cities, as somehow like they're just summoning this image of like a circle of hell.
Right, okay, so I got a phone call. My phone's on silent because I'm a good host and I ignored it, but I looked over and I saw it was Fred Patterson from Humble and Fred, and I produce the Humble and Fred show. So he was calling, and I just remembered on election day, his advice on the Humble and Fred podcast was, don't vote Chow unless you want Toronto to become San Francisco. This was the sentence from Fred Patterson, okay? Now, Fred lives in Brampton, okay? He doesn't actually get a vote in this thing. But don't vote for... I remember these words. These were the exact quote. Don't vote for
And
Chow.
did he mean that as a good thing or a bad thing?
Oh, he meant it as a bad thing.
Oh, okay.
It was not... No, and he was very...
It's actually very expensive to live in San Francisco. More so even than Toronto, to some
I can't
extent.
speak to... I haven't been to San Francisco, actually, but Fred Patterson was like, this was the warning. Like, unless you want this city to turn into that shithole that is San Francisco, do not cast a vote for Olivia Chow. So
here's the thing. My understanding of the parts of San Francisco that are desperately bad, and Vancouver has a similar problem, like with outdoor drug flagged, we're homeless, drug addicted, mentally unwell people, are essentially like just thick on the streets.
Yep,
right?
I've seen this
Skid
in
Row,
Vancouver. Yeah.
Right? That doesn't seem to me to be a problem that the nanny state has somehow created. Right? That, like actually housing those people, offering them treatment options, offering them
clean needles,
better ways to like try and step up out of poverty, like to mental health services, addiction treatment
methadone
services,
clinics,
also like income supplements, rent supplements, like those things seem to likely to solve those problems rather than exacerbate them to me. But what do I know? We'll see.
Well, I'm with you,
Olivia
Edward.
Chow's going to set up like it'll be like the Tenderloin. But I mean, back in the good old days of the 90s when I went to the school that is now called Toronto Metropolitan University, like Jarvis Street had a lot of street walking prostitutes. There was a lot of drug addicts on the street.
I still bike by it on
Jarvis Street.
Sure.
Now, I would still like go to the Phoenix and when
410
Martin
Street.
Street was behind the
today's the anniversary of his passing.
I
My goodness.
thought of that when
2009.
One side note, I was never I did not know Martin Street well. I met him several times. My cousin and close friend, one of my closest friends when I was younger, she's now out on the West Coast, Ange, was friends with Martin, and so she would always get us on the guest list when he was there, and he would always have a few drink tickets for us, and so I have fond memories of him that way, but also as just a radio personality who I love listening to, and that voice, right?
Well, if
Just
you're of a
that.
certain age and you liked alternative music,
Yeah.
Streak was a really important part of our teenage years. And
I
beyond.
was an editor at iWeekly when he passed, and got news of that, and of course our music critics and music department would sort of like hop to trying to memorialize him, right? Like as a fellow part of this sort of alternative media culture. That's the first time I remember. I may well have been aware of it.
I know where
before
you're
that,
going. Go ahead.
But your blog became such a repository of like both information but remembrances. And so I may have like read or tracked some radio rumors and stuff on the Toronto Mike blog before that, but
Right.
the first time I remember now being aware
Well,
of
I
it,
just got goosebumps
like,
because
and knowing it
I just remember
was
that
actually just poring over it and seeing all the outpouring of grief and memories on your blog.
night. Yeah.
And I was a regular reader after that, before I was ever a podcast listener.
And now you're a regular
and
guest.
now I'm a guest.
Look at the
so-
evolution here. But I got goosebumps when you started talking about reading it on TorontoMike.com because, and I'm not here to pat my, there's no brag here. This is the most tragic thing ever, and it was the saddest thing I ever posted. But I was the first public place to mention the death of Martin Street.
Yeah, and I think I may either I read it on your blog and started phoning or being in contact with the music people at iWeekly, or one of them had called me to say it, and when I started looking online, I saw yours. I can't remember which was first because the word was spreading through friend networks, I think,
Yeah.
before it was sort
Well,
of
I got
getting
I got
announced, but-
notified by somebody who worked at CFNY, who because I was, as you know, I've always been interested in CFNY and the ongoing history of
the
CFNY.
spirit of radio.
Spirit of radio. Half these episodes, sorry, Steve Paikin, but half these he won't listen. I got to soften that a bit. He just said he's a Sinatra guy, Steve Paikin.
Right.
So, but he did famously tell me he loves Toronto Mike, listens to Toronto Mike, except for the CFNY episodes. Like this was like so.
Right.
It's like he's like an old soul. Like I know he's not like he's not radically older than you and I, okay, but he might as well be 90. Do you know what I mean?
But it's just like, what are his great Toronto memories? I'm just trying to think of like who played that big band swing for him in the
James B. I'm
in
trying to
the
think. Who's he
80s when he
hanging
was
with?
growing up.
What
Yeah,
is it, the Look people.
when he was coming up was what, the 70s, the 80s, I guess.
He's probably about 60. He's got 10 on you.
No,
maybe?
that's what I'm thinking.
Oh,
Is
yeah,
that he's
yeah.
probably 10 years older. So if my heyday was like the late 80s to the late 90s of like that's when I was a
Right.
youth who was listening to the radio a lot, and where
Yeah.
my music opinions and tastes and stuff were being formed or by or around what was on the radio. Either
Right.
like, I don't like
Brave,
that.
Brave
because
New
they-
Waves or
Yeah,
CFNY. Yeah.
I just don't know where a young Steve Paikin was if there was a radio experience at all, or if it was just like old vinyl, old 78s
Crackle and pop
from
of old
Grandpa's
vinyl.
collection. I don't
Okay,
know.
so shout out to Steve Paikin, who takes the summers off. He's got a good gig, apparently. He's off for the summer here, but we'll get him back on in September. So because I know I promised you a tight 90s, so I now am going to. So
we got
we
to
missed Martin
move it
Streak.
along.
We're going to move it along because I have very specific things I want to point out. But we do miss Martin Streak. I actually posted a couple of things on Twitter. You're still tweeting, right? Like there was a couple of days where I couldn't see tweets. And it pissed me off royally. Like it just wasn't functioning. And I don't mind all the political bullshit. I don't even mind that this idiot billionaire has bought. I don't like it, but it's not enough to make me leave. Like the idiot billionaire in charge and the whole I
haven't been tweeting the last couple of years. Never mind the last recently, as much as I used to. Right, I used to be sort of a power user on Twitter. I really enjoyed it, and then for a while it just wasn't fun anymore, and I stopped using it as much, but I still use it as like a source of information, as a news feed, and just tracking other people and seeing what's going on with them, and what's going on in the world. And so I have signed up with my the Keenan Wire username for some of these other services that may or may not emerge as the competitor. But I think like for all of its garbage, right?
Yeah.
The good things, what everybody says they want Twitter to go back to or be like is like a simple chronological posts by the people you decided to follow.
Correct.
And that was one half of Twitter's magic. The other half of Twitter's heyday magic was that everybody was on it.
Sure.
Or everybody
Critical mass,
whose
we call
opinion
that,
you
right.
cared to follow. So if
Right.
there was an earthquake across the world, you were getting real-time photos from people on the scene, like regular people, news reporters in whatever country it was and all of that.
Yes.
But also
Yeah.
the world's foremost experts in earthquakes would suddenly start holding forth on what was happening there and how it compared to other things. And then all your friends were also in the conversation, like you're
100%,
at
Ed.
the water cooler watching both the experts and the live feed at the same time
Real
and able
time.
to comment between each other.
Right.
And then the charitable organizations that would be trying to do relief, like telling me what I could do, they're also on there. And so, in American politics too, it's like not just American politics, but every politics. Like the politicians themselves are sending out the message. Their critics are commenting directly on it, and so it does seem simple. Like if some competitor wants to recreate what Twitter used to be, the reverse chronological feed of only people you follow. That's the easy part. Nobody knows how to make money at that because Twitter never did, and that was its problem that led Elon Musk to take over. But that was the format everybody liked. But the ingredient was that everyone else was on it. And I don't know if we're ever going to get that back at Twitter or anywhere else. Like, I think the people who have left are not looking for another social media thing. They're like overdosed on it, or like there's this
It's
critical
just fragmented
mass,
now.
right?
Like, okay,
Yeah.
so I'm with you. So quick observations from yours truly, and then again we're gonna burn here, man. We're gonna burn here. But I did, like many people in the last 24 hours, I did create a Threads account.
Yeah, I got
this
one
is
of
the new
those,
Meta
yeah.
one. Okay, it's sort of tied to Instagram.
That has no chronological feed.
Well, not only that,
Yes.
you want to know my beef with it? I'm going to sound like an old fart here, but I do all my power content creation on a laptop, not the mobile phone. Okay? I don't know, man, I'm going blind. I make mistakes. I don't like typing on it. So there is no way to right now see comments.
It's so hard to type
I
with
can't
the
do
rotary dial.
Yeah,
It's-
I like it. I am always like, Twitter. I mainly do unless I'm out and about. I mainly tweet on my laptop. I mainly contribute to the FOTM group on WhatsApp on my laptop. And when I realized I couldn't actually update threads or even see replies and comments on my laptop, I actually tapped the guy who lost interest in Threads.
I didn't even know that was the case because I haven't tried to check it out on my
because
laptop
you're a
yet.
phone guy. Yeah, and I understand.
No, but I mean,
Oh.
I mostly am a laptop day during
You
my
can't.
workday,
It
and I would
makes you
use it.
download the app and do it there. And then but then I did get an invite to Blue Sky, which is invite only. So there's not a lot of people there.
Yeah.
So that's the only one I haven't hated on yet of all the Twitter alternatives I've tried over the last since they fired an FOTM Hall of Famer. So Blue Sky, although no one's there because people can't get in there. There's no, but
Because it's
that's
an
the only one I'm
invite-only
holding out
system,
hope
yeah.
on Blue Sky. But I've come to the realization that I can move the DM group, which I did, to WhatsApp. I got it out of Twitter. That's the FOTM DM group. Ed, you should beg me to get in there. I would add you. But I think that crappy, shitty Bluebird Twitter Elon thing is still the best game in town when it comes to real-time microblogging.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't replaced it with anything else yet as either a reader or a tweeter.
Same here.
And though I tweet a heck of a lot less than I used to, it's still the only one that I'm scanning and reading. And I do actually, I have done most of my tweeting on a laptop and most of my reading of Twitter though on my.
So
cell phone,
I'm good at reading
which is
on the
interesting.
phone.
Like,
I
do
just
both. Yeah.
I just don't like to create content on my phone.
Yeah.
I want the keyboard. 'Cause
No,
I'm a
I get it.
power content creator.
I'm still not I have written entire articles on my phone, but it is not natural to me. It doesn't flow.
And you had to do it. That's why you probably did it.
No, there's situations where in the old days, you would literally phone and use your voice to dictate the article to the
Right.
person on the other end of the
Right.
phone. And when you're in a situation where you can't safely or easily sit down and type it out.
Right.
And these days, you just type it in notes on your phone and email that to somebody.
There you
right?
go. There you go. Okay, so we're cooking with gas. And I want to thank a couple of people real quick. I want to thank the Moment Lab. The Moment Lab, I'm happy to introduce anybody listening to Matt and or Jared at the Moment Lab. They have a team of PR professionals that are ready to help you with your brand strategy, your PR strategy. They're good people working with people, good FOTMs you know and love. Shout out to the Moment Lab. And this is exciting. I want to take a moment on this because this is brand new. But there is an evening for the Downey Wenjack Fund on September 1st. That's the day after TMLX 13, by the way, Ed. I hope to see you at Great Lakes Brewery for TMLX 13 on August 31st. But
I hope to be there.
You better be there. I'll be pissed off. The next day at 7:30 at the Rec Room is Getting Hip to the Hip. There's a whole bunch of great stuff planned for Getting Hip to the Hip. FOTM Jamie Dew is a part of this. I have more details at torontomike.com, and I'll share more details in the future. But for now, you need to know that you can go to gettinghiptothehip.com. You can use the promo code FOTM10, FOTM10. You can save 10% on your ticket. I will be there. Come on out, hang out. If you love the Tragically Hip, you'll love Getting Hip to the Hip. An evening for the Downey Wenjack Fund. You big hip guy?
I am. I like the hip. I don't.
You're lukewarm on the hip. I can read
here's
your
the thing
tone
is I
there.
actually like the hip quite a lot. It's just that there are so many. When you say, "Are you a big hip guy?" Like I know big hip people who are like big hip people, and I like the Tragically Hip. I'm not. I would never was obsessive by them. Their later stuff, I'm less familiar with.
Did you ever buy a
earlier
ticket to see the
stuff.
Tragically Hip?
Yeah, a couple times.
Okay.
At Ontario Place, when Road Apples, I think they were touring, maybe.
Okay. 94.
And then at Molson Park, I think
In Barrie?
maybe around the time of Fully Completely, or like after it, but in that era of early '90s. But I mean, I'm less familiar with the stuff that came after Day for Night. I know the radio hits and all of that. I'm not an obsessive hip fan. I do like the hip quite a lot. I actually am not that big a fan of almost any band or musician because like the people I know who are real music fans like geek out on something and they know all the deep
Like
grooves and
Sinatra
stuff
and Steve Bacon.
or whatever. Yeah.
Sure.
Whereas like I'm a guy who likes the hits. There are a few like even the bands I really like outside of the Beatles. I have a couple albums that I really like that I'll like put on and listen to, and I know all the deep cuts on that one album. But it's like, well, I might be completely unfamiliar with whole entire other parts of their catalog. So
That's what you're streaming in that Moneris speaker I saw in the backyard. Okay.
there you go.
Straight up question. We have no way to know the answer, but I'm curious what you think. If you're educated, your guess on this is that I believe, and I said this to Anna Bailau, I said it to her face actually, the Friday before the election. If we had ranked balloting in this city for the election we just had, I believe Anna Bailau would be our mayor today with ranked balloting.
It's possible. It is hard to game out. In part, as Dave Meslin, who's been a big advocate of ranked ballots, says, like, it's not just because, like, when you try and go and say, okay, how many Mark Saunders voters would have Bailau as their second choice versus having, like, whatever. But also it changes the whole way people run, right? When you need to attract second choice voters, third choice voters, and all of that, you run an entirely different campaign, right? And so it's hard to know. But I think, like, Matt Elliott ran some scenarios about, you know, he was trying to game out if John Tory's endorsement had come earlier, but you're trying to apportion how much of Matlow's support goes to Bailau, some, and how much of Matlow's support goes to Chow, how much. But I think whether or not we have ranked balloting, or I'm also a fan, I have come around to being a fan of the runoff. It's more of a blunt force to have a second election
twice. Yeah.
with the top two.
Okay, yeah.
But it also means like there's a playoffs, there's a finals, right? Like this is now the preliminaries are done, and it's narrowed down to two choices, and they've got 1 week or 2 weeks to go head to head, and then but either of those systems, I think, eliminates a lot of the questions about like, well, 60 whatever % voted against you. I mean, I wrote an article and the headline was like, more people voted against Olivia Chow than in favor of her. There must be a better way to run an election. Everybody was like, well, there he is. He hates Olivia Chow. He's prejudiced against her from the beginning. It's like, I wrote the same thing after Doug Ford's last election. I was in the United States, but I did a newsletter where it was rounding up some American news and some Ontario news. And I was like saying, look, this guy got a majority with only 40%. There's a better way to run elections. I've said that about Justin Trudeau before. I've said it all along. It's like, no matter... I just think an electoral system where you clearly allow the electorate to choose to the extent they can tell you what they want, that's a better system than the one where they try to strategize based on polls. Like,
yeah, first past the poll, strategic. Yeah, who's best able to defeat the candidate I like the least? Like, who's going to prevent the guy from ripping up bike lanes guy from winning?
Yeah.
Okay. Again, quick hits here, man, because you said 90 minutes. We could do 90 minutes, but there was a candidate named Gong.
yeah,
And finished with 0.41%. That's a bit less than 3,000 votes in this thing. But on bike rides, I have personally seen 30,000 Gong signs.
yeah. I mean, Gong's campaign was sort of an interesting test of how many votes, money alone and nothing else.
Right.
Not quite. Money and a memorable last name. So that's what he had. He won the sign war. He probably put more signs on public property than any other candidate.
100%.
Right?
No doubt.
He had buses.
Yeah.
He had
YouTube ads. Like my kids are watching a YouTube video and
YouTube
Gong thing in the
like
corner.
I imagine probably Twitch streams or something. He had
Right.
like
I think it was on
online
CP24
really
maybe?
sophisticated online. He had
Yeah.
CP24 ads. He had ads in Young Dundas Square.
Wow.
That's expensive. Everybody's
Yeah.
waiting to see if he actually files his financial disclosure forms.
Yeah.
Because the penalty if you don't is that you can't run
I mean,
again.
he's been convicted
but
of
he
like
spent
a
a tremendous amount of money.
Yeah.
But had absolutely no profile. The news reports about his background that we get are that it's questionable.
Well, there's a pyramid scheme that he was. He was convicted
one of his companies,
of like a pyramid scheme.
I think a company that he owns or partly owns,
but there's some dirt there.
settled that
Not
like,
convicted.
pled guilty to involvement in a pyramid scheme.
Right.
If I seem careful, it's just because I don't want him to sue me.
Well, I don't want
have
you
all
to
the
say
goods
anything
on
that's
it,
not
but it's
true.
like
I just know what I
certainly,
read. Yeah.
Sketchy looking background, or questionable questions, deep questions about that, and otherwise, like nobody knows who this guy is, and he wasn't in the debates. We don't like so it's a pure test, but it turns out that having all that money, it gets you. What was it? Less than 3,000 votes or
Less than 3,000 votes, 0.41% of the vote. And but that is way more than... I'm just going to throw out a couple of quick hit names here before I want to ask you about drinking in parks. But Giorgio Mammoliti finished with 0.15%. I think he might be the biggest name to smallest vote count.
Yeah, I mean...
Unless
now,
you count Frank D'Angelo.
Selena Caesar Chavanez, I think, is down the list there, too. Now... She was probably a smaller name in Toronto political circles.
I don't even know that name. Should I?
She was a member of parliament, a Liberal member of parliament, but represented Whitby or Oshawa. I should know this. But she's an experienced politician.
Okay.
But so, yeah, Giorgio Mammoliti, that's got to be... Anthony Peruzza has very few silver linings in this campaign, although he seemed to be running as a bit of a lark. But
you got
if
3,000
I
votes.
know these guys well, and I don't know them that well, but I've been watching them long enough, that his main goal in this would have been to beat Giorgio Mammoliti. And he did.
But there's two other names here. One, former councillor Rob Davis.
Yeah.
He was also big on ripping up the bike lanes, by the way. But he
sure
finished
was.
with 300. I'm certain if I had run in the election, I would have had more than 378 votes.
Yeah. No, if only the FOTMs
Right.
voted for you.
But the other name that lest we forget before we move on from this election, that, by the way, Olivia Chow won, but Frank D'Angelo finished with 343 votes. That's 0.05% of the votes. Like, that's kind of interesting considering that is a name people know, right?
Somebody said he got almost as many votes as people have seen his movies.
Being Frank on CHCH there. Okay, and I see Romero now. 281 votes. Okay, so we'll leave the election now. Just wanted some of these notable guys. And again, I was mildly concerned that Chris Sky was able to get more than 1% of the vote. He ended with 1.1%. That's 8,000 votes. Like, it is a little, there's 8,000 Torontonians who cast a vote for Chris Sky. Like, I know it's a protest vote, and
Every single one of them has tweeted at me at some point.
8,000.
I'm sure of it.
Okay, so again, this is Quest for 90 minutes. Are we going to do it? Okay, we got 10 minutes left here. Okay, so I need to ask you about what's going on with
You've repeated
Torstar
it
and
so many
Postmedia.
times that
I know.
if I have wanted a little flexibility, like, hey, I could stay. I could do 95.
No,
I could do
I'm
97.
booting you after 90 minutes.
All
This is
right.
like a test here. What's going on with this proposed merger of sorts between your place of employment, Torstar? Is that the name of it? Nordstar or Torstar? What do I call this place now? Torstar?
Nordstar owns Torstar.
Okay, Nordstar owns Torstar, and there was this talk of a merger with Postmedia, but then this news almost got eclipsed right away because Google and Facebook are like balking at these mandated payments, and then perhaps that deal was predicated on that
like
cash
shut
flow.
down
So what say you
access
without,
to-
what can you share with us about what you know about this?
The fact is, I don't know much more than anybody who has read these stories knows.
Right.
We did have some information shared with us at work, but it was basically, that this wasn't necessarily at a stage where they were planning to announce that they were going to do this, but there was some irregular trading on Postmedia stock, and so they wanted to get out ahead of it. If some people had heard something and were trading based on that, they wanted to clarify what's going on. And I can't say that I necessarily think it's great news. I also don't think much of the media news I've heard in the last few years is great news. From what I know, the discussions are about merging the two companies and then splitting the Toronto Star off as a separate company that is also owned by the same group in a different ownership configuration, right? So basically the owner of the Star, Nordstar, which is Jordan Bitove, and would be sort of like be 50-50 voting owners on Torstar Postmedia that would basically involve all of the Metroland newspapers, the community papers in the smaller town, smaller city daily newspapers that are owned by the same company, along with all those Postmedia titles across the country, that they believe somehow that would allow them to join forces in selling advertising and whatnot in a way that would give them even better advantages and potentially often also protect them from some of Postmedia's creditors who they have to pay giant payments to right now. I don't know. I'm not a financially sophisticated enough guy to know how that works, that the debt to equity stuff and all of that. My primary concern as a employee of the Toronto Star, but also a lifelong reader of the Toronto Star and a believer in the Toronto Star's mission, is that the Star maintain its editorial independence, but also maintain basically its independence as a company. Like, I think there's a driving philosophy at the Star based on the Atkinson principles and all of that, but also an identity as the paper of the people in Toronto that is a different business proposition than the Postmedia chain is, or than even the Metroland papers necessarily are, right? And I also think that its business prospects are potentially different. I mean, I don't have any of the inside business details. I was somewhat reassured, although these conversations are still happening, that the way they're structuring this would not see the Toronto Star moved into some kind of like editorial alignment with a Postmedia chain, which right now, like, they share a lot of content around like Rex Murphy columns and like editorials and stuff all across the entire country, all the Postmedia papers. I wouldn't want the Star to be part of that, and it seems like it's not on the horizon. It would be a separate company, not just a separate title, but like a separate entire company that would own the Star, that would still be controlled and majority owned by the same people who own it now. So I mean that's where I'm at. So I'm like partly reassured that we're not in the midst of like a merger that would affect my day-to-day job with the Toronto Sun and the National Post, say, right? It would be weird for us to be competing against them with this kind of shared ownership structure. Everything's weird now. I mean, that other news that you said about
Okay,
Google
so
and
Meta,
Facebook
which is
eclipsing it is
Facebook,
does
Meta-
complicate every
yeah.
discussion of this, right?
Because
It's
Meta
like-
and Google are actively removing Canadian news.
Yeah, and this is one of those stories where the digital giants, the big tech companies,
Mhm.
particularly Facebook and Google, but also, basically captured the entire advertising market that the Canadian news industry used to depend on.
Right.
Like it's dramatic. You can go and look at the charts, but what it is that like almost all of when the Canadian government, in its own retaliation for their retaliation, said we're going to withdraw our government advertising from Facebook, then you could see that, like, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think it was something like they spend $6 million on like ads in Canadian news media a year and $10 million on Facebook ads. It's like that's actually generous to us. Like the other numbers are dramatically different, but basically, to deal with this situation where like the entire old business model of the Canadian news and magazine industry, the entire publishing industry and broadcast industry in Canada has been destroyed by a couple big online companies. The way the Canadian government attempted to deal with that seems to me to have deep flaws in it, in that they're like, well, we're going to put a tax essentially, or a like charge on linking to these traditional news media. So all of a sudden, if Google sends me traffic, which is a major source of Toronto Star traffic,
The biggest
like
source, right?
Our readers
I would
come
guess.
in from search engines and from social media, but primarily from search engines. Like those are potential customers, right? They're readers, and they're also potential subscribers. They often are subscribers. We're going to charge them for that. That's actually not, that's backwards. That's not what we want to charge them for, right? That's not what, to the extent that I think it's fair to ask those big companies to be part of the solution of a Canadian news industry. I don't think the format of charging them to drive us traffic that's not the solution, right? Anyhow, they've said, we're going to call your bluff. We're just going to not, there's going to be no Canadian news at all accessible on Google or Facebook, which means that for like many Canadians, it might as well not exist at all.
Right.
Right. I mean, this is a crisis, for not just for us, but for all Canadians looking for information about what's going on in Canada. So now the federal government is withdrawing its ad. It's a giant mess.
It's a clusterfuck.
I hope they're all bluffing. I hope they can sit down and work something out. I do think like the Canadian government is sinking billions and billions of dollars into trying to develop an electric battery industry, electric car industry in Canada, because of the jobs it creates, because of the potential contribution to society. I think, we spend like, I can't remember if it's $6 billion a year subsidizing people's electricity bills, right now. The Canadian news industry probably needs an injection like of that size or equivalent. And I'm not talking about the Toronto Star. I'm talking about all of them. I don't know exactly where morally the money should come from. I don't like the idea of Trudeau's cabinet or Pierre Poilievre's cabinet or anybody else's writing the checks to my bosses, because it creates the appearance, if not the reality, that we're under there. But I mean, maybe there's a potential. Well, how about this? Every Canadian is given as a tax credit or a refundable tax credit, or let's say, like you've got an account. Every Canadian has $200 in their account, and that's subscription money for media, and it's provided by the government, and every year they get to spend $200 on subscriptions. And if Toronto Mike starts requiring a $5 a month subscription, they can spend it on that. And if the Toronto
minute they
Star,
announce that, I will absolutely introduce.
and if the Toronto Star wants to, but I mean, a mechanism like that would let the people of Canada decide which places they wanted to support and where they're directing a government subsidy, while also potentially recognizing. I mean, here's the fact: is that like I know at the risk of coming right up to our tight 90, but this is like, I know it appears that I have a vested interest in this issue, and I do.
Yes.
But my interest goes beyond it because, frankly, like, opinionated blowhards like me who are paid to be columnists, like, they're traditionally considered one of the value offerings of a paper. They help provide the identity and hopefully attract subscribers.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think the world is going to be missing the voices of people like me if the business market disappears. First of all, people like Matt Gurney and Paul Wells have shown, like, you can start a Substack and use your personality, your voice, your whatever, to have a pool of subscribers. But also, there's a lot of people, a lot of smart people, who will do that for free or for close to free, right? They will set up a personal blog. You can find them on Twitter or whatever comes after it and all of that. But like investigative journalism is really expensive. You have like teams of reporters who earn, you hope a middle-class salary working for a year on one project. And it may not even turn into anything, right? It may be that after a thorough investigation, nothing happened, right? Nothing bad happened. There's no scandal there. But we are paying people, the Toronto Star, the Globe and Mail, the CBC, traditionally Global and CTV, they're paying people to dig into those things. They're paying full-time reporters to be at City Hall watching meetings on your behalf so that they can tell you if something important happens there that you need to know, they can let you know, right?
Right.
Those are the things that very few people are going to do for fun. And that it's not impossible, but it's close to impossible to fund as a like one-person startup. It's hard. It's one thing for me to start up for you to run your own podcast here, or for me to start up a Substack where I send people a newsletter once a week with my opinions in it. It's another thing for me to start like a team of 5 investigative reporters who are going to spend 2 years working on one story as our first project. Like, it's like,
right.
There's no it's a very difficult indie business model for that, right? And I think society depends on that stuff. That's the real value of what traditional newspapers and TV news and radio news and websites, like the traditional journalism, that's the value of what it provides, and that's what is at risk of disappearing. And, as much as my bosses and everybody else's bosses in the industry and a lot of like innovators are all trying to figure out a new business model to do that old same thing, this work that we love, there's a societal interest in seeing that. That's similar, I think, to the societal interest in other industries in Canada that get a subsidy. But I'm not sure. I just have there are no good guys to root for in this fight between the government and, because it seems like they're all, I don't know. That's a terrible way to end that phrase.
No, you know what? You did eloquently express those thoughts. And I love what you said there. Now, the 90 minutes, I would literally start playing Lowest of the Low right now if we wanted to come close to 90 minutes. But I had 2 more things on my notes. Can I just burn them?
Yeah, let's
burn
them.
So
yeah.
I'm blowing by this 90 minutes.
I built a little
thing.
leeway into
okay, so you knew I'd do this. Okay, smart. That's why you're writing for the Toronto Star. Okay. Here, I'm going to read this. An environmental assessment conducted for Infrastructure Ontario on its planned Ontario Place redevelopment says the project will result in a net benefit for the physical environment, but doesn't take into account the creation of the controversial spa or live music venue planned for the site.
You try to imagine like a study that says that, in fact, the National Football League has no higher incidence of concussions than any other employer. And then the asterisk is like excluding the players. We did not include players in this sample.
That's a good analogy.
Or like if you exclude the Parkway, there are almost no cars in the Don Valley at all. Like hardly any traffic in the Don Valley.
Right.
Outside of the Parkway itself.
If we don't look,
so it's like a net traffic benefit, the Don Valley, except for the Parkway.
So what the fuck, Ed? Okay, that could be the name of your Substack. Okay, if things blow up for you, what the fuck, Ed?
I have a column I wrote about this, or it's partly about this. that will appear in Friday's Toronto Star,
Okay, the
I
sneak
believe.
peek. Okay,
But
tomorrow.
it's like, I mean, the Ford government has decided to exempt private projects from environmental assessment requirements. And so you say to yourself, why the hell even conduct the assessment? Why would you do that? And I'll tell you why. It's because now Doug Ford and his team get to hold up.
Yeah, they waive
They
this
get to
paper.
refer to the fact that
And people are
environmental
stupid,
assessment has said it's a net benefit. This is a guy who has spent 10-ish years claiming that he and his brother found $1 billion of efficiencies at Toronto City Hall, which is like just gibberish. Like his numbers, when he used to provide the numbers, were like, some of those are new fees, some of those are fees they eliminated, some of those are additions of revenue, some of them are cut revenue, some of them are like, well, some pinko would have given a bigger raise than we did to the cops, and so we'll just count that as a savings. And it's like, so like the man is not against entirely fabricated gibberish, and so if you can torque it, so here's an EA that says that all the stuff around the Therm Spa and the Live Nation thing will have a net benefit. They're going to plant some new trees and all of that. Those areas are going to be, Therm, as a condition of its thing, has to do some cleanup of the water around there and all of that. It's like, but what about the giant glass enclosure that's going to have to be heated and cooled on the Toronto waterfront facing south all year? What about the $500 million garage that's going to draw all this car traffic to the area? What about the forest of trees that they're raising? Like, well, we don't, that's not included in the environmental impact.
But why is this why is this okay? I know this basically speaks to why we need, journalists covering this stuff and shining a light on this. This is stinky.
Yeah, if you ask me, it's not okay. I mean, the guy got elected to a majority government, and so
that's a license to shovel shit on the constituents.
Basically, it's like if people object, they need to like call their preferably conservative member of provincial parliament. Like the one thing Doug Ford, the one thing you can say for him is that when he thinks something he's doing unpopular, he will back down sometimes. Often.
Well, we hope.
Not always.
Right? Like, this is all such, like, this is how we run. Like, let's hope he backs down, because we all bark about how much bullshit that is. But, man, what a way to live your life in, the biggest city in the country.
Like, the thing is that often, like, people will say, and, I get it, because I feel it too. Like, it's like when Donald Trump was doing certain things, when, even when Rob Ford was in the height of the crack scandal, they're like, how is it that this guy can't just be fired? Right? Like, why isn't there some condition where, like, if you admit to smoking crack, you have to resign? And it's like, there's two safeguards. Like, when you elect the premier or the prime minister or the president of the United States or whatever, one thing that keeps them in check is the electorate, right? In the next election, you can vote in somebody else.
Right.
And the other is like a sense of shame, right? There's a constitution and all of
not
that.
There anymore because
but
of
it's
that,
like
right?
It's like people have to say, like, their own sense of propriety keeps them from pushing the boundaries too far, and increasingly you see like a sense of shamelessness, which is what I think you see here. Is just like, I mean,
so.
You got all these Ford family lawyers and Caroline Mulrooney getting the new King's Counsel. It's like, hey,
that stinks too.
It's a piece of paper you can wave around, just like an environmental assessment.
Okay. Now I'm angry. We closed badly, but I did. So this song's very long. So before I thank the sponsors, and Ed, you were great as usual. I can't wait for the next quarter when you come back. That'll be in 3 months. But Beers and Park, where are we at with it? If you can do it.
Well, there's this pilot project coming where there's going to be 20 parks in the city where people can drink alcohol. And if that goes well, who knows? Maybe it'll be 40 next year. I mean, I think, and I don't even drink beer anymore.
Right.
I drink non-alcoholic beer. But still, I just say, like, let people have a beer in the park.
Well,
if they want to have a beer.
Disclose this here? I promote my park beers and invite people to join me. I put a map on Twitter and my web, and I say, here's the X in this park where I'm going to be with cold Great Lakes beer. Come to this X, and if you're over 19 years old and you're a responsible adult, you can have a beer in this park with me. Like, I'm out of fucks to give on it all.
Yeah, and I think most people are like that. I have heard from people in response to a column I wrote that they are concerned that it's going to be like drunk teenagers and all of that. And I was just like, there already are drunk teenagers there.
Of course.
But, you know, if we need to police boisterousness and stuff, then police that. But
That's
just let
what I
people
say.
have a glass of wine or a beer or a six-pack or whatever. Like,
let us be responsible adults, and the irresponsible people police that activity.
Yeah.
Like, don't tell me, you know, pushing 50 here that I can't have a responsible couple of cans of beer with my friends in the park.
You can sit on the licensed patio on the street. You
Right.
can sit in your own front yard if you want.
Right.
Now, there's lots of people who don't have a front yard.
Right.
Let them go out and have a beer, too.
Right. Like there's a good scene in The Wire about this, like where it's put it in a paper bag and the cops won't bug you, and they just put it in a paper bag and
I mean, to some extent, people already do that, and the cops mostly don't bug them. Right. But it's just like, I don't like that hypocrisy. I think just let people
legalize it,
and then deal with the problems if problems emerge. But I think the experience in other places where they allow it is that there aren't actually that many problems that arise.
And that brings us to the end of our 1,287th show. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Toronto Mike. Ed is also on Twitter with me. We're hanging in there. He's at the Keenan Wire. Our friends at Great Lakes Brewery are at Great Lakes Beer. They're hosting TMLX 13 on August 31st from 6 to 9 p.m. You should join us. Palma Pasta is at Palma Pasta. I have a lasagna for you, Ed. Woohoo! Getting Hip to the Hip is Getting Hip Pod, and that event again is on September 1st. Get a ticket and save 10% with the promo code FOTM10. Recycle My Electronics are at EPRA_Canada. The Moment Lab are at The Moment Lab, and Ridley Funeral Home are at Ridley FH. See you all next week when Simon Head, the director of the new Lowest of the Low documentary, joins me in studio. That's Monday. And FOTM Andrew Stokely will drop by to kick out his 10 favorite Lowest of the Low songs of all time. So it's going to be a low lovin' on Monday. See you all then.
I better not name. And I've seen the sun go down on Shakla Coast.